Ancient Egypt's greatest secret was not a hidden tomb but a vanished world of knowledge. Imagine halls filled with countless scrolls, containing everything from spells to summon gods to blueprints for building pyramids. The legendary libraries of Alexandria and other centers of learning were the intellectual hearts of a civilization obsessed with recording every facet of existence. By the end of our journey, you will know exactly what was inside these lost archives, from royal secrets to advanced scientific texts that challenge our view of history. What cosmic truths were written in their star charts, and what powerful magic was contained in their spellbooks? What does it feel like to stand at the edge of such a profound loss? The ambition behind the great Library of Alexandria was as colossal as the pyramids themselves. Established by the Ptolemaic kings in the 3rd century before the Common Era, this was not merely a repository for scrolls, it was a conscious attempt to gather every single book in the known world. Think of the sheer audacity of that goal, to build a complete archive of human understanding under one roof. The library formed the core of a larger research complex called the Mauseon, a temple to the Muses, where the greatest minds of the age were funded by the state to think, to debate, and to push the boundaries of knowledge. Its halls were said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, a number so vast it remains difficult to comprehend even today. But this beacon of light was tragically fragile. The library suffered a series of devastating fires, the most famous during Julius Caesar's civil war, and endured a long, slow decline over centuries. Its final destruction is shrouded in mystery, a victim of shifting political powers and the slow erosion of an era. The true tragedy lies not just in the burning of papyrus and ink, but in the silencing of countless voices, the extinction of unique perspectives on history, science, and the human experience. So what specific treasures were lost in those flames? What unique works did the Ptolemies so desperately seek to own? The knowledge housed in those great libraries was written on a material as ingenious as the ideas it carried. Papyrus was the lifeblood of Egyptian record-keeping, a precursor to paper that transformed the Nile's reeds into a surface for immortality. This was not simply paper, it was a technological marvel of the ancient world. The process began with the tall papyrus plant, its triangular stalk cut into thin strips. These strips were then laid side by side with a second layer placed directly on top at a right angle. After being soaked, pressed, and hammered together, the plant's natural sap acted as a powerful adhesive, bonding the layers into a single, remarkably durable sheet. Once dried and polished smooth with a stone or shell, the surface was ready for a scribe's brush and ink. These individual sheets were then glued together to form long rolls, some stretching over 10 meters, creating the iconic scroll format. But this very medium, so brilliant for its time, held a tragic vulnerability. Papyrus is organic, supremely susceptible to damp, mold, and fire. In the dry Egyptian desert, it could last for millennia, which is why we have the tombs to thank for the precious fragments we do possess. Yet in a place like Alexandria, with its humid coastal air, the lifespan of a scroll was drastically shorter. This fragility means that every text recovered from the sands is a statistical miracle, a lone survivor from an ocean of lost wisdom. The vast majority of those hundreds of thousands of scrolls simply returned to dust, their unique contents vanishing forever. So what was actually written upon these precious, perishable surfaces? What specific secrets did the scribes consider vital enough to preserve for eternity? Beyond the spells and star charts lay the true engine of the empire, written on countless scrolls. The day-to-day reality of ancient Egypt was preserved in vast archives of administrative records, the bureaucratic heartbeat of a civilization that ran on paperwork. Think of tax rolls meticulously listing every farmer's contribution of grain and linen. Picture census data accounting for every soul in a district, from the high priest to the newborn child. These were not dry lists, they were the living map of a functioning state. Granary reports tracked the kingdom's food supply with an almost obsessive precision, detailing every sack of emmer wheat and barley that entered and left the state silos. Legal decrees settled land disputes and recorded marriages, etching the rules of society into permanent form. This intricate web of information allowed the pharaoh's officials to manage a kingdom stretching over 1,000 kilometers along the Nile. It was this very bureaucracy, this ability to organize and control resources on a massive scale, that enabled the construction of the pyramids and the stability that lasted for 3,000 years. The loss of these records means we have lost the granular story of ordinary people, the millions of lives that collectively built one of history's most enduring empires. We are left with the grand monuments, but the countless human stories that supported them have largely faded into silence. So what of the voices from the very top of this society, the kings and queens who ruled with divine authority? The pharaohs may have ruled the earthly kingdom, but their ultimate destination was a cosmic realm of gods and judgment. The most intimate and vital texts preserved in temple libraries were not administrative records, but detailed guidebooks for navigating the afterlife. At the heart of this tradition was the Book of the Dead, known to the Egyptians as the Book of Going Forth by Day. This was far more than a simple collection of prayers. It was a practical survival manual for the soul's perilous journey into eternity. Imagine a newly deceased person, their spirit awakening in a bewildering and dangerous new world. The spells contained in these papyrus scrolls were their essential toolkit. One spell might be a charm to prevent the heart from betraying its owner during the final, terrifying weighing of the soul against the feather of truth. Another provided the precise words of power to command a magical ferry to carry the spirit across a treacherous lake of fire. These texts even included detailed maps of the underworld, charting a course through monstrous gatekeepers and labyrinthine corridors to reach the paradise of the Field of Reeds. The spells were often accompanied by vivid illustrations, showing the deceased triumphing over snakes and demons, or being presented to the god Osiris, the Lord of the Dead. To possess a copy of this book, often custom-made and buried with the individual, was to hold a ticket to immortality. It gave the soul the confidence and the knowledge to overcome every obstacle. This profound belief in a guided afterlife reveals a civilization deeply concerned with cosmic order and personal salvation. The loss of so many unique versions of these funerary texts means we have lost countless individual expressions of faith, each one a personal map to eternity. Long before the Book of the Dead offered salvation to the wealthy, the promise of immortality was a privilege carved in stone for kings alone. Deep within the earliest pyramids, on the cold, hidden walls of burial chambers, we find the pyramid text. These are the oldest known religious writings in the world, a collection of over 700 spells etched directly into the very fabric of the royal tomb. They were not meant for living eyes, but solely for the resurrecting pharaoh. These powerful incantations were a literal roadmap, guiding the deceased king from his sarcophagus up into the night sky to take his place among the imperishable stars. The language is raw and ancient, filled with potent magic to ensure the pharaoh could transform into a divine being, even commanding the gods themselves. But as the centralized power of the Old Kingdom crumbled, so too did the royal monopoly on the afterlife. A profound social and religious revolution was underway. The elite, the high officials and regional governors began to claim these divine rights for themselves. They could not afford pyramids lined with spells, so they adapted the tradition, writing their own versions of these powerful texts directly onto the wooden surfaces of their own coffins. This new collection is known as the coffin texts. This was a monumental shift, a democratization of eternity. The spells became more personalized, more concerned with providing for the soul's needs in the next world, from food and drink to protection from supernatural dangers. The coffin texts also introduced a new and terrifying concept, the idea of a final judgment, where the heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of truth. This evolution, from the exclusive stone carvings for a god-king to the personalized coffin inscriptions for a noble, shows a civilization grappling with fundamental questions of divinity, morality, and who truly deserve to live forever. The loss of so many of these unique coffins means we have lost the individual stories of this first wave of commoners who dared to reach for the stars. These divine guidebooks for the dead drew their power from an entire universe of myth, stories that were meticulously recorded on temple scrolls. At the very beginning of everything, according to the priests of Heliopolis, there was only a dark, endless ocean of nothingness called none. From these chaotic waters, the god Autumn willed himself into existence, a solitary being standing on the first mound of dry land. He then performed an act of creation that required no partner, spitting forth the air god Shu and the moisture goddess Tefnut, who in turn gave birth to the earth Geb and the sky Nut. This was the foundation of reality itself, a family of gods who are also the very elements of the world. But the most gripping tales involved their descendants, a dramatic saga of betrayal, murder, and resurrection that played out on a cosmic scale. The good King Osiris was murdered by his jealous brother Set, who tricked him into a coffin and threw it into the Nile. His devoted wife, the goddess Isis, searched the entire land, found his body, and used her powerful magic to temporarily restore him to life long enough to conceive their son, Horus. This set the stage for an epic conflict, a battle between the rightful heir Horus and the usurper Set that would decide the fate of the entire kingdom. The courtroom of the gods became a stage for this drama, with Isis using her cleverness to outwit Set and secure the throne for her son. This was not just entertainment, it was a sacred narrative that explained the very nature of pharaonic power, where every ruling king was seen as the living Horus, and every deceased one became the resurrected Osiris, Lord of the Dead. This cycle of death and rebirth was mirrored each and every day by the sun god Ra. Every evening, Ra was believed to die, traveling through the perilous 12 hours of the underworld in his solar bark, fighting off the serpent of chaos, Apep, to be reborn triumphantly at dawn. The loss of so many temple libraries means we have lost countless variations of these foundational stories, local tales that would have added depth and color to our understanding of how the Egyptians saw their gods interacting with their world and with them. The same libraries that held cosmic myths also contained scrolls of startlingly practical science. Among the most remarkable are the medical papyri, which reveal a society grappling with the human body using a blend of sharp observation and spiritual belief. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is the world's oldest known surgical treatise, a detailed manual for treating physical trauma. This text reads like a modern doctor's notes, methodically categorizing injuries from head to toe. For each case, it provides a logical triage stating, "This is an ailment I will treat," or "This is an ailment I will not fight," indicating the limits of their healing arts. It describes how to set a broken nose, how to suture a gaping wound, and even identifies the correlation between a head injury and paralysis on the opposite side of the body, demonstrating an early understanding of the brain's functions. Alongside this cool rationality existed the Ebers Papyrus, a vast encyclopedia of medicine. This scroll is a sprawling collection of over 700 diagnoses and remedies covering everything from digestive troubles to skin diseases. It prescribes honey for its natural antibacterial properties and recommends willow leaves, which contain a precursor to aspirin, for pain relief. Yet intertwined with these effective treatments are spells meant to drive out the demons believed to cause sickness. A physician might recite a powerful incantation against a fever demon while also applying a poultice of crushed herbs. This was not seen as a contradiction, but as a holistic approach, addressing both the spiritual cause and the physical symptom of an illness. The loss of countless other medical scrolls means we have lost an untold number of herbal cures and surgical techniques, a library of ancient wisdom that blended the clinic with the temple in a single, unified quest for healing. This same logic that healed the body was applied to shaping the world. The rind mathematical papyrus reads like a master teacher's lesson plan, a collection of 84 problems designed to train the minds of scribes in the art of calculation. It reveals a system that was pragmatic and immensely powerful, built not on abstract theory but on solving the real-world problems that faced the kingdom every single day. They calculated the area of a circle not with the precise number pi, but with a brilliant shortcut, subtracting 1/9 from the diameter and squaring the result, a method that yielded answers accurate enough to build perfect cylindrical grain silos. They understood how to determine the slope of a ramp, a calculation absolutely vital for hauling multi-ton stone blocks to the dizzying heights of a pyramid's peak. This was not just mathematics for its own sake, it was the essential engineering behind national monuments. Every temple's perfect symmetry, every pyramid's unwavering alignment to the cardinal directions stemmed from these precise geometrical operations. This knowledge was also the key to survival itself. The annual flooding of the Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, but it was also a chaotic force that erased field boundaries. Scribes used these very same mathematical principles to swiftly resurvey the farmland, recalculating plots so that taxes could be fairly assessed and every farmer knew their portion. Can you see the connection? The scroll that taught a scribe how to divide 9 loaves of bread equally among 10 men used the same foundational logic that allowed an architect to divide the sky to orient a monument for eternity. The loss of so many mathematical treatises means we have lost the countless refinements, the elegant solutions to problems we can no longer even conceive. We are left with the answers in the form of silent, towering stone, but the full elegance of the thought process that created them has largely vanished. The precision of their mathematics found its ultimate expression in their observations of the cosmos. Egyptian astronomers, often priests within the temple libraries, were mapping the heavens with the same meticulous care that scribes applied to tax records. They tracked the steady march of constellations and the wandering paths of planets, inscribing their movements on star charts that were both scientific instruments and sacred texts. Their greatest achievement, born from this celestial vigilance, was the creation of the world's first 365-day solar calendar. This was not an abstract system, it was a practical tool for survival, perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of their world. The most critical event of the year was the inundation of the Nile, the annual flood that deposited rich, life-giving silt across the farmlands. The Egyptians made a stunning connection. They noticed that the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, when it first becomes visible just before dawn after a period of invisibility, always coincided with the flood's arrival. By carefully tracking Sirius, the priests could predict the coming of the waters, allowing the entire kingdom to prepare. This celestial warning system was the difference between a bountiful harvest and catastrophic famine. But the calendar did more than just forecast the flood. It structured the entire ritual life of the nation. Each of the 3 seasons, Akhit for the inundation, Perit for the growing period, and Shemu for the harvest, was tied to specific religious festivals dedicated to the gods who governed these cycles. The precise timing of a temple ceremony for Osiris or a great offering to Hapi, the god of the Nile, was dictated by the stars. A festival held on the wrong day was considered ritually ineffective, a dangerous misstep in maintaining cosmic order. The loss of their most detailed astronomical scrolls means we have lost the granular data behind their predictions, the nightly logs of observations that allowed them to see the patterns in the sky. We are left with the monumental result, a calendar that shaped Western timekeeping, but the patient, stargazing work that built it remains one of their most silent accomplishments. Yet for all their celestial precision, these same scribes were equally obsessed with grounding their kingdom in a tangible past. The annals of Egypt were not kept in bulky volumes, but on precious scrolls and monumental stone slabs that meticulously chronicled the passage of their divine rulers. The Palamo stone, a fragment of a much larger black basalt slab, is one of our most precious windows into this early historical record. It is not a story in prose, but a stark, year-by-year accounting of the kings from the earliest dynasties. Each rectangular compartment on the stone represents a single regnal year, inscribed with the most critical event of that year to help people remember it, much like we might recall a year by a major storm or a great celebration. It notes the height of the annual Nile flood, the founding of temples, and the fashioning of statues for the gods. This was history as a sacred ledger, a way of proving that the current pharaoh was part of an unbroken chain of legitimate power stretching back to the gods themselves. An even more ambitious document was the Turin King List, a papyrus scroll that attempted to compile the names of every ruler from the age of the gods all the way to the then present day. Imagine the audacity of that project, a master list of all pharaonic history. It assigned each king a precise reign length, sometimes stretching into impossibly long mythical periods for the earliest divine rulers. But these lists were far from objective history. They were instruments of state propaganda. A pharaoh who came to power through usurpation might simply erase his predecessor's name from the official record, chiseling it away from temple walls and omitting it from the king lists, effectively deleting that person from existence. Rivals or unpopular rulers were condemned as non-entities, their reigns wiped from the official timeline. The history they preserved was a carefully curated truth, blending verifiable events with mythological origins to project an image of eternal, unchanging order. The tragic loss of so many of these chronicles, with the Turin King List itself surviving only in tattered fragments, means we have lost the official scorecard of one of history's longest-running dynasties. We are left with a puzzle where many of the pieces are forever missing, forcing us to reconstruct the story of 3,000 years from monuments, tombs, and the silent gaps in a broken stone. But those same king lists and temple annals were silent about the incredible journeys undertaken to fuel the kingdom's grandeur. The real adventure stories of ancient Egypt were not found in royal decrees, but in the expedition logs and trade reports stored in administrative libraries. These were the gripping accounts of missions sent to the very edges of the known world. To the south lay Nubia, a land of harsh deserts and legendary gold mines. Egyptian expeditions would travel for weeks, establishing fortified outposts to oversee the brutal work of extracting the precious metal that sheathed the tombs of pharaohs and the statues of gods. The logs from these missions detail the challenges of navigating treacherous river cataracts and the constant negotiations with local chieftains. To the northeast, in the lands of the Levant, another critical resource was sought. Egypt was a river valley largely devoid of large trees, yet it needed immense quantities of timber. The famous cedar forests of modern-day Lebanon were the target. Egyptian envoys would arrange for the felling of massive cedar trunks, which were then hauled to the coast, lashed into gigantic rafts, and floated all the way down to the Nile Delta. This wood became the sacred doors to temples and the elegant hulls of royal barks. But the most legendary of all these voyages was the expedition to the fabled land of Punt. This mysterious place, likely located in the Horn of Africa, was Egypt's source of the utterly exotic. The most detailed account comes from the temple walls of Queen Hatshepsut, depicting her ships returning with a cargo that seemed magical. They brought back living myrrh trees with their roots carefully balled in baskets for replanting in Egypt, sacks of fragrant incense resin, ebony wood, ivory tusks, and even exotic animals like baboons and leopards. The official reports from such a journey would have included rough-drawn maps of the coastline, lists of goods exchanged, and perhaps the first ethnographic notes ever recorded, describing the customs and appearances of the people of Punt, who lived in beehive-shaped huts on stilts. These were not mere shopping lists, they were the foundational documents of globalization, proving that 3,500 years ago, a civilization on the Nile was actively connected to a web of trade that stretched across continents. The loss of these specific logs and maps means we have lost the step-by-step narratives of these incredible adventures. the first-hand voices of the explorers who sailed off the edge of their maps to bring back the wonders that defined their world. The same meticulous record-keeping that managed grain supplies also governed the most intimate aspects of human life. Tucked away in the archives were countless legal documents, from marriage contracts to wills, that formed the invisible framework of society. These were not arbitrary rulings, but a sophisticated legal system that touched everyone, from the farmer in his field to the merchant in the market. A standard marriage contract, for instance, was a pragmatic business arrangement that clearly outlined the wife's rights and the financial penalties a husband would face if he divorced her without cause. It protected her property and ensured her security in a way that was remarkably formal for its time. Inheritance disputes were settled with written wills that meticulously divided a family's assets, whether it was a parcel of farmland, a small herd of cattle, or a collection of copper tools. These documents reveal a people deeply concerned with fairness and the orderly transfer of wealth across generations. Court proceedings were recorded on scrolls, detailing cases of theft, boundary disputes, and even personal injury. In one surviving record, a man is accused of stealing a donkey. The testimony of witnesses is recorded, the evidence is weighed, and a judgment is delivered, all following a recognizable legal procedure. This was a society that believed in written proof and due process. The loss of these countless legal papyri means we have lost the voices of ordinary people in their most vulnerable moments, their arguments over a shared wall or their hopes for their children's future, all etched in ink and then returned to dust. Yet for all their legal contracts and expedition logs, the Egyptians also carved out space in their libraries for the human soul. Beyond the spells and star charts, they wrote poetry, told epic stories, and composed profound instructions on how to live a good life. This was the literature of the heart and mind, a world of entertainment and moral guidance that speaks to us across the millennia with startling directness. Consider the tale of Sinew, a story so popular that copies of it have been found in tombs and on scattered ostraca for centuries. It is a gripping narrative of flight, exile, and longing for home. Sinew, a high official, overhears a plot in the royal palace and flees Egypt in a moment of panic. He finds refuge with tribal chieftains in the Levant, where he rises to become a powerful and respected leader, marries the chieftain's daughter, and raises a family. But despite his wealth and success, he is consumed by a profound homesickness. He describes himself as an aging man whose skin is now coarse, his body weak, his eyes failing. He longs for nothing more than to return to Egypt, to die on his native soil and receive a proper burial. The story captures the universal ache of displacement, the idea that identity is tied to the land of one's birth. His eventual pardon and return to the court of the pharaoh is a moment of intense emotional release, a celebration of royal mercy and the enduring pull of home. This was not just a story, it was a national epic that explored what it meant to be Egyptian, no matter how far one roamed. Alongside these great adventures, the shelves held texts of a quieter, more introspective nature. The Instructions of Ptahhotep is one of the oldest books of wisdom in the world, a father's advice to his son on how to navigate life with integrity and grace. This is not a list of commands, but a series of nuanced reflections on human behavior. Ptahhotep counsels humility, urging his son to listen patiently even to a poor petitioner, for great skill can be found in the most unexpected places. He speaks of the importance of self-control, warning against the man who is ruled by his belly and his desires. He offers practical advice on being a good guest at a dinner party, and profound insights on how to lead men justly, arguing that true authority comes from being a clear channel for Mat, the cosmic principle of truth and order. This wisdom literature was the ethical backbone of the educated class, a guide for scribes and officials on how to be both successful and good. The loss of so many of these poetic and philosophical works means we have lost the full range of their emotional and intellectual life. We have their pyramids, but we are missing countless verses that gave those monuments a human voice. This cosmic order known as Mat was not a distant concept, but the very fabric of society, woven into the daily lives of everyone from the pharaoh to the farmer. The instructional texts known as Sebate were the practical manuals for living in harmony with this truth. These were not commandments from a god, but hard-won wisdom passed down from a father to his son, from a vizier to his successor, offering a roadmap for a life of integrity and purpose. At the heart of this philosophy was the recognition that chaos, known as Isfet, was the ever-present enemy of order, and every individual had a role to play in holding it back. A text like the instructions of a Menimope, written by a scribe for his children, delves into the quiet virtues of the heart. It advises against the greedy pursuit of wealth, warning that a measure of wheat gained by fraud has no blessing, and the gods will sweep it away like a flood. It champions the silent, patient man who controls his temper over the hot-headed one who shouts in the marketplace. This was an internal morality, a call for personal righteousness that went beyond mere obedience to the law. It taught that true success came from a character in alignment with cosmic truth, a heart that was light as the feather of Mat itself. But what did this mean for the person in power? The pharaoh was the ultimate guardian of Mat, his primary duty to defeat Isfet and maintain the balance of the universe. For the common official, this meant administering justice without partiality. A text might instruct a magistrate to judge the powerful and the weak with the same scale, to listen to the plea of the widow and the orphan with the same patience he would afford a noble. His ethical responsibility was to be a clear channel for Mat, ensuring that his actions, from collecting taxes to settling a land dispute, reinforced the harmony of the entire kingdom. This created a profound social contract, a chain of ethical obligation linking the humblest laborer, who was responsible for honest work, to the highest priest, who performed the rituals that kept the sun rising. The loss of these countless scrolls of Sebate means we have lost a vast library of human conscience, the nuanced conversations about how to be good in a complex world, echoing from a civilization that understood its survival depended not just on stone and grain, but on the moral weight of every single heart. The silent stones of the pyramids hold a secret language of angles and alignments. We must ask, where were the master plans, the detailed schematics that translated a pharaoh's divine vision into immutable reality? While no single, comprehensive architectural manual has survived the ages, the sheer, breathtaking precision of their monuments screams that such documents must have existed. Imagine the mathematical knowledge required to keep the Great Pyramid's base perfectly level across 13 acres, a feat so precise that its corners vary by less than a fraction of an inch. This was not guesswork, it was applied geometry of the highest order, meticulously recorded on scrolls now lost to us. These would have been the sacred textbooks of the master builders, detailing the exact ratios for slope and the complex calculations for distributing the immense weight of millions of stone blocks. They understood the principle of the seat, a specific measure of incline that ensured every pyramid face rose at the identical, perfect angle. At a vast temple complex like Karnak, the challenge multiplied. Here, the texts would have evolved into something more, a grand orchestration of space and divinity. The layout was not random, it was a cosmological map. The gradual darkening and elevation as one moved from the open sun-drenched courtyards into the inner sanctum's profound darkness was a deliberate architectural journey, mirroring the creation of the world from light into the primordial mound. The placement of every column, the height of every pylon gate, and the alignment of processional avenues were all dictated by a sacred geometry meant to please the gods and maintain cosmic order. The knowledge required to quarry, transport, and erect a single 70-ton obelisk, to raise it without a single crack, speaks of engineering manuals filled with solutions to problems we can barely comprehend today. These lost scrolls were the bridge between spiritual ambition and physical creation, containing the very formulas that gave stone the illusion of weightlessness and turned a quarry into a prayer. The same logic that healed pharaohs was extended to the beasts that powered the kingdom. Among the most practical texts in any temple archive were those dedicated to veterinary medicine, a sophisticated science for maintaining the health of Egypt's most vital assets. A prized bull was not just a source of meat and leather, it was a living engine for plowing fields and a potential candidate for divine status. A chariot horse was a strategic military investment, the equivalent of a modern tank. Their well-being was a matter of national security and economic stability. Surviving papyri detailed treatments for specific ailments in cattle, from eye infections to digestive troubles, prescribing poultices made from acacia leaves and barley dough to draw out infection. One text might instruct a herdsman on how to set a goat's broken leg using a splint of reeds and linen bandages, a procedure requiring the same calm precision as a human surgery. For the majestic horses that pulled the royal chariot, special salves were blended to treat gall sores and hoof ailments, ensuring they remained swift and agile in battle or during the grand processions that displayed the pharaoh's power. This care even extended to the ritual sphere. An animal destined for religious sacrifice had to be perfect, unblemished, and in peak physical condition to be considered a worthy offering to the gods. A priest would inspect the creature with the eye of a seasoned veterinarian, and the accompanying scrolls would list the exact signs of health to look for, from the clarity of its eyes to the texture of its coat. Can you see the chain of dependency, the kingdom's food, its military might, and its very connection to the divine all relied upon the health of its animals? The loss of these specialized veterinary manuals means we have lost the quiet, daily wisdom of the herdsmen and stable masters, the unsung experts who kept the heart of Egypt beating strong through the care of its creatures. The same libraries that held legal contracts and wisdom texts also preserved the soundscape of the civilization. We can reconstruct their world of music from surviving lyrics, depictions of performances, and the instruments themselves, carefully stored in temple treasuries. Music was not merely entertainment, it was a form of power, a necessary component for maintaining the cosmic order. In the great temples, the days began with the singing of hymns to awaken the god within the sanctuary. These were not casual songs, but precise, ritualized compositions performed by specialized priestly choirs, accompanied by the rhythmic shaking of the sistrum, a sacred rattle whose sound was believed to appease deities and ward off chaos. The lyrics of these hymns, preserved on papyrus, were poetic invocations. A hymn to the Nile god Hapi might describe the river's life-giving flood in vivid, grateful verse, while a song for Ra celebrated his daily victory over the serpent of darkness. The air would have been thick with the scent of incense and the interwoven sounds of deep-throated harps, high-pitched flutes, and the steady beat of hand-held drums, all working in concert to create a bridge between the human and the divine. But music also filled the royal court and the streets of everyday life. At a pharaoh's Jubilee festival, the atmosphere would be electric. Trumpets blared to announce the king's appearance, their clear, piercing tones a signal of his authority. Troops of dancers, their movements graceful and acrobatic, would perform to the driving rhythm of clappers and tambourines, celebrating the renewal of his reign. In a village during the harvest, workers might sing call and response folk songs to ease the labor of threshing grain, their voices rising and falling with the simple, repetitive tasks. Lutanists and harpists provided entertainment at banquets, their melodies floating through garden courtyards as guests feasted. We even have lyrics for love songs, tender and direct, that speak of the ache of separation and the joy of reunion, proving that the emotional language of music is truly timeless. The loss of their musical notation means the precise melodies are gone forever, leaving us with only the silent instruments and the ghost of the words. We can see the harp, but we cannot hear the song it played for a pharaoh. We can read the lyrics, but the tune that gave them wings has vanished into the silence of the ages. A dream was never just a dream in ancient Egypt. It was a message, a coded warning, or a divine diagnosis sent directly from the gods. Alongside the medical and mathematical scrolls, temple libraries held a different kind of practical guide, manuals for oneromancy, the sacred art of dream interpretation. These texts were not for entertainment, they were essential tools for priests acting as spiritual doctors and political advisors. Imagine a priest being woken in the night, a nobleman anxiously describing a vivid dream of a withered tree. Consulting his papyrus manual, the priest would cross-reference the symbol. A dying tree might foretell an illness in the dreamer's family, a warning that required immediate ritual action to appease an angry ancestor spirit. Other dreams were more hopeful. To see a serpent in a dream could be a terrifying omen, but according to these texts, it might also signify the healing power of the goddess Isis, transforming a nightmare into a promise of recovery. This practice blended seamlessly with their medical science, as a troubling dream was often the first symptom of a physical or spiritual ailment that needed both a poultice and a prayer. The interpretation was a science in itself, with standardized meanings for common symbols that allowed priests across the kingdom to provide consistent, authoritative readings. But the gods spoke through more than just dreams. The world itself was a constant broadcast of divine intention, and the priests were the master decoders. Specialized omen books taught them how to read the patterns of everyday reality for clues to the future. The flight patterns of birds, the peculiar birth of a two-headed calf, or even a sudden shift in the wind could all be potent signs. A flock of geese flying in a specific formation might predict the success of an upcoming military campaign, while a crack in a temple wall observed at a certain hour could be a dire warning that the gods were withdrawing their favor from the pharaoh. This was not superstition, it was a sophisticated system of observation based on the core belief that the universe was interconnected. If a god was angry, that discord would ripple outward, manifesting in the natural world and in the bodies of its people. The priest's role was to spot these ripples early, to diagnose the spiritual problem, and to prescribe the exact ritual, offering, or incantation needed to restore balance. The loss of these specific interpretive guides means we have lost the key to their lived reality. The rule book they used to navigate a world they believed was constantly whispering its secrets to those who knew how to listen. A scorpion sting in the night was not just a medical emergency, it was a spiritual attack. The vast collections of magical spells preserved in temple and household libraries were the first line of defense in a world teeming with invisible dangers. These were not abstract rituals, but practical, urgent instructions for survival. A common man, fearing the venomous creatures of the desert, would not only seek an herbal antidote, but would also recite a specific charm over a knotted cord to be tied around his wrist. The spell might command the poison itself, saying, "Flow out, scorpion poison, come forth onto the ground, you who creep in the darkness. Horus shall charm you, Seth shall spit upon you." This was a direct address to the malevolent force, using the power of divine names to neutralize the threat. The same principle applied to the unseen world. Evil spirits and the restless dead were a constant fear, believed to cause everything from nightmares to sudden illnesses. Protective amulets, often made of faience or carved from precious stones, were inscribed with spells and then worn on the body. A mother might place a small ivory wand, carved with powerful deities and magical creatures, around her child's crib to create a sacred barrier against any ghostly intruder. This was everyday magic, as common and essential as locking a door at night. This defensive magic had a more personal and sometimes darker counterpart. Love spells sought to bend the will of another, using sympathetic magic to create an unbreakable bond. A typical spell might involve crafting two small figurines, one representing the seeker and the other the desired person, and then binding them together with red thread while reciting an incantation that called upon a deity like Hathor, the goddess of love, to inflame the target's heart. Other spells were more direct, intended to separate a couple or curse a rival in business or love. These curses, often written in red ink on a pottery bowl or a figurine, would be ritually broken or buried in a cemetery, transferring the malevolent intent to the demons of the underworld to execute. The target of such a curse could find their life unraveling through inexplicable misfortune, believing they had been struck by a divine hand. For the modern mind, it is crucial to understand that the Egyptians saw no clear boundary between a spell, a prayer, and a medical prescription. A single papyrus scroll could contain a remedy for a fever that listed both the herbs to grind into a poultice and the precise words to chant to drive out the fever demon believed to be causing the illness. The healer was simultaneously a doctor, a priest, and a magician. He used his knowledge of anatomy to set a bone, his understanding of botany to compound a healing salve, and his access to divine words to address the spiritual root of the ailment. In this worldview, a disease was not a random biological event. It was an invasion, a manifestation of chaos, and it required a full-spectrum response that combined the physical and the spiritual. A protective charm against snakebite was just as scientifically valid as a tourniquet, because both were tools to combat a clear and present danger. The loss of these countless magical handbooks means we have lost the complete manual for living in their world, a guide that treated the health of the body, the safety of the home, and the fate of the soul as one single interconnected reality. The rustle of papyrus in Alexandria's great library was not only in the Egyptian tongue. Its shelves formed a veritable Tower of Babel, a symphony of languages from across the ancient world. Alongside hieratic scripts were elegant Greek scrolls of philosophy, complex Babylonian astronomical tables etched in cuneiform, and medical texts from the Hittites. This was a truly cosmopolitan hub, a crossroads of global intellect. To navigate this sea of foreign words, a new kind of scholar emerged, the translator. These were not mere linguists, they were cultural ambassadors, painstakingly rendering the wisdom of Mesopotamia's stargazers and the logic of Greek geometers into the common Greek of the library's scholars. Their work was the engine of an unprecedented intellectual fusion. A Babylonian observation of Jupiter's movement, once translated, could be analyzed alongside Egyptian temple records, creating a richer, more complete map of the heavens. Greek medical theories on the body's humors could be compared with the practical, trauma-based surgery of the Egyptian Edwin Smith papyrus. This was the real magic of Alexandria. It was a place where knowledge ceased to have a single nationality. The famous Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek was said to have been commissioned by the Ptolemies for this very library, a monumental project involving 72 scholars. This act alone shows the sheer scale of their ambition to possess and make accessible the sacred texts of every major culture. The loss of these translated works and their original source texts means we have lost the evidence of that first great conversation, the moment humanity began weaving its separate threads of understanding into a single, magnificent tapestry. Yet behind the public hymns and legal scrolls lay a sealed world of state secrets. The most restricted archives held documents so sensitive that their very existence was a guarded mystery. These were the royal archives, accessible only to the pharaoh, his vizier, and the most trusted scribes. Here, one would find the raw, unfiltered nerve center of the empire. Coded diplomatic correspondence detailed delicate negotiations with rival kings in Mesopotamia and the Hittite Empire, letters filled with veiled threats, strategic marriages, and promises of gold and military support. These were not the polished versions carved on temple walls for public pride, but the candid, often anxious, exchanges that maintained a fragile peace or prepared for a coming war. Alongside these were the meticulous records of the royal harem, an institution of immense political significance. These documents listed not just the pharaoh's wives and concubines, but their families, their regional connections, and the intricate networks of influence that extended from the palace's innermost chambers. The birth of a child to a favored wife was a state event recorded with precision, as it could alter the entire line of succession and shift the balance of power among the noble families. But perhaps the most volatile texts were those deemed theologically dangerous. A pharaoh like Akhenaten did not simply declare a new sun god overnight. His radical revolution, which temporarily replaced the entire pantheon with the worship of the Aten sun disk, would have been planned and justified in secret memos and theological treatises long before his iconoclastic decrees were made public. The archives would have held the early drafts of this heresy, the arguments for monotheism that were later systematically purged from the official record by his successors. To possess such a text after the restoration of the old gods was to hold evidence of a state-sponsored crime against the cosmos itself. These restricted shelves held the unvarnished truth behind the polished facade of divine kingship, the human fears, political calculations, and radical ideas that were far too dangerous for the people or even for the gods to ever see. These priceless scrolls did not simply appear, they were the life's work of a disciplined intellectual elite. The scribe was the absolute cornerstone of this entire knowledge system, a figure of immense prestige who underwent years of grueling training to master the intricate scripts. A young boy entering the scribble school or the house of life would spend his youth practicing hundreds of hieratic signs on broken pottery shards and limestone flakes. His fingers would cramp from holding the reed brush, his back would ache from hunching over, and his ears would ring with the instructor's corrections. This was a brutal meritocracy where perfection in a single stroke was demanded. The reward for this sacrifice was a passport into the upper echelons of society. A skilled scribe could rise to become a treasury official, a military commander, or a royal architect. He was exempt from the back-breaking manual labor that defined the lives of most Egyptians, a fact celebrated in a famous text that advised, "Be a scribe, so your limbs may be smooth and your hands soft." You can go white-clothed and be respected by courtiers and magistrates, but the work was far from glamorous. In the dusty scriptoriums, teams of scribes would work in silence, their only sound the soft scratch of the brush on a fresh roll of papyrus. One might be meticulously copying a medical text, his hand steady as he rendered the precise instructions for setting a bone. Another might be translating a trade report from a Nubian outpost, turning the rough notes of a soldier into the polished, formal language of the royal archive. Accuracy was sacred. A single miswritten magical symbol in a funerary text could render the entire spell useless, potentially jeopardizing a soul's journey to the afterlife. This reverence for the written word elevated their task from simple copying to a sacred act of preservation. And at the very pinnacle of this profession stood the librarians of Alexandria, men like Zenodotus of Ephesus. He was not merely a custodian of books, he was a pioneer of literary scholarship. Faced with the chaotic influx of scrolls from every corner of the world, Zenodotus took on the Herculean task of producing the first critical edition of Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. He compared multiple, often conflicting copies line by line, making judgment calls on which verses were original and which were later additions, effectively establishing the canonical texts that would influence Western literature for millennia. His successor, the poet Callimachus, then attempted the impossible to create a comprehensive catalogue of the entire library's holdings. The result was the Pinax, or tables, a massive work in 120 scrolls that itself became a legendary treasure. This was the world's first library catalogue, a systematic breakdown of authors and their works by genre, from epic poetry and history to medicine and rhetoric. It did not just list titles, it included biographical notes on the authors and critical commentary, a staggering intellectual achievement that transformed a random collection of scrolls into a navigable universe of knowledge. These men were the first great information scientists, building the conceptual shelves upon which all future knowledge would be arranged. Their work meant that a scholar seeking a specific text on astronomy no longer had to wander aimlessly through vast storerooms. He could consult the Pinax and be directed to the precise cabinet and jar. This systematic organization was the true genius behind the library's power, turning a king's collection into humanity's first global brain. The finality of the fire was absolute, but the real loss was a slow, grinding decay. While the great library at Alexandria suffered catastrophic burns, countless other collections simply molded away in damp storerooms or were torn apart for kindling over generations. The sheer volume of what vanished is almost beyond calculation. We know of the existence of over 100 Egyptian pharaohs from monumental inscriptions, yet we possess written records from only a fraction of them. Entire dynasties are silent. The personal libraries of philosophers like Aristotle, acquired by the Ptolemies, were consumed in the flames. The original histories of Babylon, the complete plays of Aeschylus, the first maps of the African coast beyond the Nile, all are just ghost titles in an old catalogue, their contents forever unknown. This was not merely the burning of books, it was the deletion of entire civilizations from the human story, a collective amnesia on a global scale. Yet against this overwhelming darkness, a few sparks miraculously survived. The dry, sterile air of desert tomb shafts became an unintended time capsule. In places where no moisture could reach, papyri lay undisturbed for millennia. A farmer's will, a temple inventory, a love poem scribbled on a potsherd, these fragments were preserved not by design, but by the perfect aridity of the sand. An even more bizarre form of preservation emerged from the recycling habits of the common people. When papyrus became scarce or expensive, old administrative documents and discarded literary texts were gathered, soaked in glue and plaster, and pressed into a material called cartonnage. This papier-mâché-like substance was then molded into the brightly painted mummy masks and chest covers for middle-class burials. The irony is profound. A tax collector's ledger from the reign of Cleopatra, no longer needed by the living, was used to fashion the eternal face of the dead. Today, scientists use sophisticated imaging techniques to peer through the plaster and read these recycled texts, recovering lost works from the very objects meant to guard a corpse for eternity. We are left with a haunting duality. The grand, centralized libraries are gone, but the most intimate whispers of their civilization were saved by the very climate that threatened their cities and the pragmatic reuse of their own written heritage. The story of Egyptian knowledge is not one of a single, glorious bonfire, but of countless small, quiet extinctions punctuated by the most unlikely and fragile of resurrections. The scope of these lost libraries is almost impossible to grasp. They held the precise angles for a pyramid and the whispered prayers for a dying child, the legal rights of a farmer and the epic adventures of an exile. This was not a single genre of knowledge, but the entire spectrum of human thought, from the mathematics that built an empire to the love songs that comforted its people. We are left with the stark reality of a cultural catastrophe of unimaginable scale. The burning and decay of these archives did not just erase facts, it severed our connection to the inner lives of an entire civilization. It created a silence where there was once a chorus of millions of voices, each with their own story, their own dream, their own understanding of the world. The true legacy of these libraries is a haunting reminder of how fragile our collective memory truly is, how entire worlds of wisdom can vanish, leaving behind only fragments and echoes in the sand.